Okay, so what we're going to do today is we are going to talk about something that I feel like is very, very important. It's a mission of my own personal mission to educate people on narcissistic trauma. And I know a lot of times, you're probably hearing a lot of information about what it means to be a narcissist, or how a narcissist behaves, or what are the signs that you may be involved with a narcissist. And while that's very, very important to understand those things, today I'm going to focus more on just talking about what are the signs that you might have this kind of trauma, or what are the signs that someone that might have this trauma. So it could be your client, because I'm assuming everyone here is probably in the field of healing and transformation. That's why you're here. But it could also be, family members or friends, just people that they're in your world, people you care about. So we're going to focus on that today. I'm really intending to just help you all understand something today, because I feel really strongly about the fact that narcissistic trauma is really a silent epidemic. And I think that we have a lot of narcissistic systems in our world that are just running under the gun. We're not talking about it. Even if people are aware of it, maybe they're just not talking about it. And we're not talking about the fact that it's a real problem. We're not able to recognize how much of a problem it is in our own lives and then the lives of others. And in my own experience, I really feel like that there is a subtle form of narcissism that really just we're not talking about. And I say this just from personal experiences. There's a lot of mental health professionals that aren't even really fully aware of this. And this is not their fault, but it's just true that even narcissistic personality disorder is a fairly new concept in psychology. In that, psychology has been around for a long time, but it was only until 2010, I think it was about 2010, that this personality disorder was added to the DSM. So it's a fairly new personality disorder. And so the concept is newer. And so it's still being researched and it's still being developed, as a topic. And so what I want to talk about is the subtleties that can show up with narcissistic trauma and with this kind of dynamic in a relationship. Okay, and I want to talk to you about it specifically because I know that you are I'm calling it the front line. You're on the front line of this issue, right? Because you're dealing with clients' problems. And so you're coming in contact with what's going on with them, their issues. And you might even be affected by narcissistic trauma yourself and not even realize it. This is actually way more common than I even realized until like the past 2 or 3 years, that I'm realizing how often it is that a person will come to me and I'm working with them and they don't know they have this kind of trauma. And they're really kind of surprised when they find out that they do. So I feel like, again, this is a very important topic to consider. Now, if you don't already know me, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about me, because you need to know, why the heck should I listen to this person? And I have helped hundreds of people with this issue. I specifically help coaches, healing and helping professionals. And my mission is to help you unleash your potential for peace and purpose and prosperity by learning to release narcissistic trauma. So I am a narcissistic trauma healing expert. I've created something called the Heartshine EFT method, which I'll tell you more about later. I am the founder of the Heartshine EFT Mastermind. I'm also a certified clinical EFT and energy psychology practitioner, and I serve as a certification mentor with EFT Universe. So that's a little bit about me. Now, let's talk about narcissistic trauma, and I want to make it just as simple as possible here. I don't want to get really complex, because the truth is, it actually is really simple. Narcissistic trauma is just a kind of trauma that happens when you're involved with a pathologically narcissistic dynamic. And I'm going to go into that a little more in a couple more slides, but it pathologically narcissistic. Okay, now, this could be something like a relationship that most people that are researching about narcissism are reading a lot of stuff about being narcissistically abused by a spouse. That's the most common one that you see when you're researching. Also, you may notice that, sometimes it may be about parents or a family member. It can be a friend. It could be a coworker or a boss. Okay. And the other thing to keep in mind is that narcissistic trauma also can be the result of being involved with a narcissistic entity. So a narcissistic entity is an organization, and like at the extreme, it would be like a cult, but it could also just be like a toxic workplace, a workplace or an organization that has a toxic culture where narcissism is the way that things operate, a narcissistic dynamic. Okay, so, and most of the time when it comes to narcissistic entities, there always has to be a narcissistic individual somewhere in that organization. So the truth is, you may not necessarily have direct contact with narcissistic individuals in an organization, but the effect is the same as far as the trauma. So you can see how, wow, like a lot of people out there could be suffering from this kind of trauma and just not even realize it, because they're already just thinking, well, I don't have narcissistic trauma because I haven't experienced this one way of receiving it, and it's just not true. It can come from so many different places in your life. Okay, again, let's make it really simple. Like, who is vulnerable to narcissistic abuse? Anyone who's experienced childhood trauma that has created a type of core belief which are easily exploited by narcissists. Okay, now let me just break that down a little. So as you all know, because you're all in this profession, everybody has some kind of trauma, and most trauma occurs in childhood. And then that is where we create core beliefs, and those core beliefs inform patterns that move with us through life into adulthood. And we create patterns that then attract certain experiences into our life. And if it's true that narcissists operate by knowing what your weak spot is, and I believe this is true, narcissists know where you feel weak or where you feel like you lack, and they show up as the solution to your problem. They show up as the person that can complete you. They show up with the answer to everything you're trying to figure out. So if you have a core belief that's created in childhood, like I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I can't make it on my own, those are really common core beliefs. And if you're working with clients, those are really common core beliefs, just for instance. And then what happens is one day, a narcissist comes along and says, oh, I'm really smart. I'm so smart. And, I can help you do this or do that. Or, I will never leave you. I will always be with you, or just whatever it is that you feel like you need to complete you, they're going to show up as that. And if you have this type of core belief, and you're not even aware of it, you're going to be vulnerable to getting into a dynamic with this person. You're going to have blurry boundaries. You're going to have trouble, being able to trust yourself when red flags come up, because red flags always come up at the beginning of a relationship with a narcissist. There's always red flags, and always, because hindsight's 2020. When you look back, you can say, oh, wow, I really just ignored those red flags. I pushed my doubts aside. And why did I do that? Well, because I didn't believe in myself, because I didn't trust myself. So I think you can see that it's actually pretty easy to be vulnerable to narcissistic abuse. It's not something that only happens to certain people. It's everywhere, and it's everyone. Everyone has, the ability to end up getting into a situation where they don't see what's happening. They don't see the narcissist coming, and it doesn't mean anything bad about you. Okay. It's just human nature. So give yourself permission. If this has happened to you, give yourself, a break. Let yourself off the hook. It's happened to a lot of people. And then what I want to talk about is the fact that there is one definition of narcissism that's out there. If you go to a Google search and you type in, what are the signs of narcissism, or what is a narcissist like? You're going to get this definition. I got this from Psychology Today. It's like the top hit when you type in, narcissism. And I just want to say that while this definition is definitely true, it's very limiting. Okay. If narcissism is characterized by a grandiose, okay, that's the key word here, grandiose sense of self-importance. Absolutely, that is one of the traits. A lack of empathy for others, absolutely one of the traits. And a need for excessive admiration, a belief that they're unique and deserving of special treatment, that they're entitled. Okay. Now here's the part I want you to see. If you encounter someone who consistently exhibits these behaviors, you may be dealing with a highly narcissistic individual. Yes, this is true. However, what this really leaves out is that there are plenty of narcissistic individuals out there that you will encounter that may not exhibit these exact behaviors. And so you may miss it. And it may be difficult for you to even identify what you're dealing with. Okay, and so I'm gonna go on and go a little deeper into this. So there's a model of narcissism that's a little more recent. Recent as in, this research started coming up in 2014. There's a couple psychologists out there. They're doing some amazing work around the narcissistic personality disorder. And just to give you like a really kind of superficial look at this, there's something called grandiosity and vulnerability in narcissism, in pathological narcissism. And so what you see out there a lot when you search is about grandiosity. And this is the really obvious kind of narcissistic personality disorder. And it's in your face. It's in your face. You can't miss it. It's that personality that is like, I'm the best. I'm so awesome. I'm the smartest. They can be rude. They can be bullies. They can be aggressive. They're really out there. It's really obvious. Those people aren't hard to miss. But what isn't talked about as much is the vulnerability and the vulnerable ways of expressing. What happens is in the vulnerable expression, the theme is I'm the victim here. Okay, so you're seeing a different expression of narcissism, and it's not as easy to detect. So I'll just give you like a really quick kind of simple example of the two different ways they can present. So in a grandiose narcissist, you might hear them say something like, well, I'm so smart. Everybody should listen to me because I know the most. I'm the smartest. Okay, now that's obvious, right? That's obvious that that person feels very superior and they're expressing that. A vulnerable narcissist, when they're in a vulnerable mode, would say something like, well, it's just so sad. And I'm just so hurt that nobody ever listens to me. No one ever listens to me because, I am smart and I do know some things, but no one ever listens to me. So you can see the difference here is that what's happening is that even though the same sense of superiority and need for special treatment is behind this, But in the vulnerable expression, it sounds like victimhood. And it's not as easy to detect. It's there, but it sounds like victimhood. Okay, so you see the difference? Okay. And then within these two ways of presenting, in the grandiose and the vulnerable, you've got two expressions. And this is the part that I just find absolutely so empowering to understand, is the overt and covert expressions of the personality disorder. Because whenever you've got a narcissist coming at you, okay, it's what you can see. It's the behaviors you can see. It's what they say and do. So I call this the push. Okay, this is the push. They're coming at you. They're being a bully. They're yelling at you. They're being violent, maybe, or aggressive, or angry, or obnoxious. So it's something you can see. It's something that's coming at you. And then the covert expression is what you can't see. It's the pull. Okay, it's the pull. So you've heard of the push-pull dynamic, right? That's a really common term. So with narcissism, in the narcissistic dynamic, there's a push-pull, push-pull. So the narcissist will go from overt to covert, and overt to covert, back and forth, back and forth. They'll flip back and forth. And this can be very confusing. And it creates a dynamic in which you're being pulled back and forth in this relationship. And so what you have to remember here is that whether it's overt or covert, the behavior or the non-behavior, what they're saying and what they're not saying is all designed to do one thing. Okay, the one thing that narcissists are looking for, which is narcissistic supply. Okay. But what I want to, oh, I think I skipped a slide. No, I didn't skip a slide. Okay. What I want to talk about now is just some signs of narcissistic trauma. Okay. And this is something also that if you type this in Google and you look this up, you're going to get a list of the signs of narcissistic trauma, which are kind of obvious. And I think also that while they are definitely signs of this kind of trauma, they're very general, and they're just kind of this big umbrella of signs like anxiety, depression, lack of self-esteem, PTSD, chronic health issues, insomnia, and nightmares. We all know that these are signs of trauma, period, no matter what kind of trauma it is. And so these signs are just really obvious, and they don't necessarily tell us anything specific. They don't really help us because we can't, sure, people could be anxious or depressed, but that doesn't mean they have narcissistic trauma. So we need to know a little more. We need to understand, like, what are the subtleties of narcissistic trauma? And how does it show up in our lives, in ourselves, and in our clients? And here's the thing is, it's a lot easier to see these things in your clients or in your friends or your family than it is to see it in yourself. Okay, that's the way it is, right? So I just invite you to consider that, these things are easy to see in others, but you might have to look a little deeper in yourself to see, am I having these signs? Because if you can pair some of these signs with the more obvious signs, then you might start to say, oh, wow, maybe I should really take a deeper look at this. So being easily overwhelmed and confused is a very common sign of narcissistic trauma. And this is because of the fact that if you've been experiencing it, which most of us have been experiencing it for a long time, then you've gotten yourself into a space of cognitive dissonance, meaning, you've been the victim of gaslighting probably for a long time, and you've learned to gaslight yourself. You're not trusting yourself, and you're constantly doubting yourself. And so what happens is when you get into a situation, and say in your business where you're trying to make decisions, You're trying to figure things out. There's a lot to get done. There's a lot of things that you have to work out. And then you can get really overwhelmed and confused because you're doubting yourself. You're not sure, you're not able to really trust yourself. Another way it can show up is people pleasing. This is a really big one. People pleasing, it comes from a codependent dynamic. Many of us who've experienced childhood trauma developed a people pleasing behavior, which can also be considered fawning, which is one of the responses to stress, right? One of the responses to stress is it's fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. So fawning turned into people pleasing can show up a lot of times in your business, in your profession, as just wanting to make sure your clients are always happy, like over delivering, being worried that people aren't going to be happy with you, taking responsibility for everyone else's emotional well-being, that kind of thing. Which leads to trouble setting boundaries, right? Trouble setting boundaries. We all struggle with this sometimes. But because of the fact that narcissistic trauma sets us up to not believe that we even deserve boundaries, or not even understand what boundaries are, because narcissists are boundaryless creatures. They are boundaryless creatures, and they abhor boundaries. So especially if you've been raised by a narcissist, you don't even know what boundaries are, maybe until you adulthood, and you're looking around, you're like, what is this thing that other people are having here called boundaries that I have no idea what this is? And we have to stumble and learn on our own how to have boundaries. And then we have a lack of trust in ourselves and others. And I mentioned that already, but I can't mention that enough, is that when you've been in the narcissistic dynamic, you never know what to expect. You're walking on eggshells because the narcissist is not regulated. They're not emotionally regulated, and they can show up as a lot of different people at different times. So you never know what you're going to get. So you're not trusting yourself, and you're not trusting other people. And then this shows up again in your business, in your life, as a difficulty, taking action, moving forward, working with others, difficulty letting go of things you need to let go of, letting others help you, trusting yourself to go through some kind of a learning process, because everybody needs to go through a learning process. If you're learning something new, and you need to be able to kind of move into the unknown and trust that you're going to figure everything out, it's very, very difficult. Sometimes it'll stop you, sabotage yourself, and not move forward and get frozen. Because of the constant self-doubt and criticism, we've internalized the criticism that came at us when we were children. So if you have a really critical narcissistic parent, you've internalized that criticism, and you don't even know, like it's in there constantly. It's an internal, constant critical voice that is just doubting your every breath, your every move. Well, why did you do that? Well, why weren't you better at that? Well, what's wrong with you? And then you start thinking these thoughts like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? Why can't I get this right? Or, why am I such a loser? Or why can't I figure this out? Those types of the narratives going on. And it creates this constant self-doubt. You're sabotaging us once again. There's an extreme fear of failure and success at the same time. Yes, I know that sounds weird, but there's a fear of failure because it wasn't okay to make mistakes when you were younger. You may relate to this. It wasn't okay to make mistakes. Maybe in your family system that was a big no-no. And so there's a lot of fear of making mistakes. And at the same time, there's a fear of success because narcissists don't want you to look better than them, or have more than them, or to know more than them, or to get more attention than them. So success could possibly mean that you would be getting attention, or maybe getting wealth, or getting notoriety, or being recognized for what you're good at, right? And that is not safe if you have been in a dynamic where, you know, the narcissist would punish you for that happening, or where for some reason it was not safe. And whatever your past is, whatever happened to you in your child or even adulthood, which can also lead to a fear of being visible. So if you grew up where, you know, if you drew any attention to yourself, it was not good. It was negative attention, right? Whatever that looked like for you. And so then now as an adult, you want to show up and be visible, because you have to be visible in order to succeed, right? You've got to get noticed. You have to interact with other people, whether you work for yourself or maybe you also work for someone else. You want to be in relationships. You want to have meaningful connections with others in life. You have to be visible in order for that to happen. And if there's a fear of being visible, you're going to isolate, you're going to sabotage. And a chronic dismissal of your accomplishments, meaning you're just never going to truly acknowledge your gifts and your skills and your talents, no matter how much you accomplish, which I know so many of you out there that are listening to this have accomplished so much. I mean, despite what you've been through, you have accomplished enormous things in your life. You've overcome so much, and you're here, and you're functioning, and you're maybe even thriving in a lot of ways, but you're not owning your accomplishments. You're not owning them because of that fear of being criticized or punished, or somehow there being a negative outcome. And you're always looking towards what you don't have, and you're in a lack mindset. Okay. Now, let's just talk about the clues that someone could be in a narcissistic dynamic. So we're going to kind of shift now, and we're really kind of talking about more what you're observing in others, because I talked about, so we were going to talk about how to recognize these things in your clients. And this can be a little tricky, so I'm just going to like pre-frame this with, there's really no way for any of us to know if our clients are in a narcissistic relationship. Like, we can't know that, and we're not some of you may be mental health professionals, but if you're not a mental health professional, you know, you're a coach, you're in a peer-to-peer relationship, you can't know this for someone. But what you can do is you can see the clues. Okay, you can see the clues. So this is a very short list of just what I find to be, in my own experience and in my clients' experiences, the most obvious clues to me is that if I hear someone referring to someone in their life as a difficult person a lot. Yeah, well, so-and-so, they're very difficult. You know, they're difficult a lot. This is typically, I find, almost a synonym, is that, did I say that right? A synonym for narcissist is a difficult person. So many times you can hear people making excuses for someone who may be a narcissist by saying, oh, they're just difficult. You know, you just get used to it. You know, so-and-so, Aunt so-and-so, she's just really difficult. She always has been. And we just put up with it, or this and this and that. So that's a common one. Another one is hearing someone talk about a relationship being draining. So if you hear someone say a lot, well, you know, that person's really draining, or interacting with them always drains me, so I have to really be ready to talk to them. I have to get ready. I have to be in a good space to talk to so-and-so. Or after I spent the whole weekend with so-and-so, I knew I was going to be really drained going into it. So I made this plan, and I had to come up with a plan on how to manage that, because it's really draining. That's a red flag, because a relationship should not be draining. Okay. This is not normal. This is not normal for a relationship to drain you. Another sign is taking full responsibility for managing a relationship. This is really common, and this is a codependent behavior, which is if you hear someone talking about using the word managing, well, I have to manage this person a lot, or I have to strategize around, how they're behaving, then this is not good. Again, this is not a good sign, because we shouldn't be responsible for managing others people's behavior. If you were in a childhood situation where you had a lot of dysregulated adults around you, you took on the responsibility for managing their behavior, because you needed to do this in order to make yourself feel safe. So you worked really hard to make sure everyone was okay, so that everyone would be happy, and then you could feel safe. And then in adulthood, you're still doing it with family members, with friends, with clients, whatever it is, it's showing up, it's managing a relationship. Okay, we got to stop doing that. Got to stop doing that, people. Hiding your efforts for self-improvement from family or spouse. Okay. Wow. Can you relate to that, or have you heard that a lot? And yes, because narcissists don't want you to improve yourself. If you were to improve yourself, then you might get a clue, and you might, have some boundaries, or you might all of a sudden not feel inferior and not need the narcissist anymore. Family systems that are narcissistic and dysfunctional don't want you to improve yourself, because the only way those types of family systems function is that everybody's in this specific role, and everybody is relating to one another, through the drama triangle, or through some kind of narrative in which it's toxic, it's not healthy. So if you were to improve yourself and become more autonomous or self-differentiated from your family or your spouse, that is threatening to them. And they don't want you to do that, because they need you to be in the role they're in, so they can feel okay with themselves and they can feel safe. So yeah, you're going to hide your efforts. Your client's going to hide their efforts for self-improvement from these people. That is a bad sign. It's a red flag. Okay, rationalizing others' poor behavior. We kind of already talked about this on the difficult one, like, oh, so-and-so, just they had a really hard life, or I know they're just going through a really hard time. And here's also a sign that someone is experiencing codependency, is always like guessing what the other person is feeling. Like, okay, well, I know they're behaving this way just because of this thing that happened to them. I know this is how they feel. So I know they're just feeling this way or that way. They're just feeling really insecure. They're just feeling really upset or down. And so that's why they're behaving this way. That's why they're treating me this way. So I understand that's what it is. And this is completely dismissing your own feelings, or if your client's doing this, is dismissing their own feelings and their own needs and how this dynamic is affecting them. Right? We've got to stop doing that. Got to stop doing that. All right. So with all that being said, what I want to let you take away from this, because we don't have time to go super deep. Oh my gosh, I could talk about this forever, and I probably should stop talking about this and move forward, right? I could talk about this forever, but okay, here's the one thing that I want you to know. This is the worst advice, and I'm talking about this from personal experience, that you can get or give to someone who is involved with narcissists on any level. And I actually heard this from this big, like, self-development seminar, big deal. And I'm not going to say the name, but I'm just going to say that what they're teaching in this is, if you show up 100% authentically as yourself, then that other person's just going to shift, and they're just going to fall into line. They're going to show up too. So it's this idea that, like, I can change this person by just being like really authentic and really, developed, personally developed, and really advanced. Like if I could just be more high vibe, and if I could just know more, and I could be more enlightened, then this person over here they'll change. they'll show up the way I want them to, or they'll be nicer to me, or it'll fix things. And this is absolute crap. This does not work. Okay. This is a misunderstanding, I believe, of the idea of showing up authentically as yourself. And I tell clients this all the time, is when you show up as authentically as yourself, then the other people around you will change. They will show up differently. But with a narcissist, they're only going to show up in a way that's going to get them what they want. So you're showing up 100% authentically as yourself, and they're showing up with only one thing in mind, is how do I get narcissistic supply out of this? And they'll change their behavior accordingly to that. So not according to you showing up, but they will continue to show up with only one goal, is to get narcissistic supply from you, no matter what you do. I'm sorry, that's a hard truth, which is why I'm going to tell you that what you can do and what you can help your clients focus on is showing up 100% for yourself and turning your focus within. Stop focusing on the narcissist and turn within and start showing up 100% for yourself. It's the biggest, most important thing I can tell you today. Okay, so one of the most healing things that ever happened to me in my journey of self-healing was learning how to reparent my inner child. And I'll tell you, I did a lot of things. I did a lot of things to heal. I took a lot of courses. I got a lot of deep work, private work with other EFT colleagues and coaches. But when when I ended up working with a therapist by the name of Patrick Tian, who is now my mentor for inner child work, he really opened my eyes to how my inner child was so wounded, and that I wasn't going to get much more healing accomplished. I wasn't going to move forward very quickly if I wasn't able to take a look at my inner child. And so what I'm telling you here is that reparenting is one of the most powerful things that ever happened to me. And in my clients, I see reparenting the inner child as so profound. They have so much more breakthroughs and heal so much faster and more complete when they're doing this inner child work. And I feel like that's kind of the missing piece, because I know there's a lot of amazing people out there doing work, helping people heal from narcissistic abuse. And I've been the benefit of a lot of their work. But I feel like that this is like the missing piece that can really take you from just like barely surviving it into really thriving. And also, your clients, work you can do with your clients, and reparenting your inner child can help anyone heal any kind of trauma, not just narcissistic, but any kind of trauma.